In a small village surrounded by mountains and forests, lived a young man named Kia. He shared a humble hut with his aging mother, left behind by his father who had passed away when Kia was still a boy. Life for Kia and his mother was filled with struggle. The hut they lived in was old and worn, much like their hopes for a better future. Every day, Kia would craft beautiful trinkets from shells and beads, which he took to the village market to sell. But despite the beauty of his work, the money he earned was never enough. Many days, Kia and his mother had little or nothing to eat. As Kia grew older, he watched his childhood friends thrive. One by one, they became wealthy men, respected by the village. They had large houses, families, and their lives seemed full of joy. Meanwhile, Kia remained in his worn clothes, living in the same tiny hut, struggling to care for his mother. His friends, now busy with their new lives, no longer visited him. They had left him behind, and Kia felt more alone than ever. Each morning, Kia would rise early, put on his tattered clothes, and walk to the market with a basket of trinkets on his head. He hoped every day that life would change for the better, but it never did. The weight of his hopelessness grew heavier with each passing day, and Kia began to wonder if he was cursed to live in poverty forever. One morning, as Kia made his way to the market, his mind wandered into the depths of his worries. How would he ever make enough money to take care of his mother? Could his life ever change? He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice a rock in the road. His foot struck it hard, and he stumbled, falling to the ground. The basket of delicate trinkets flew off his head, scattering the beads and shells across the dirt road. Villagers nearby saw what happened, but instead of helping him, they began to laugh. One woman in particular sneered, "Look at him, still poor and pathetic. Selling trinkets like a child while his friends have become men." Kia's face burned with shame. Every laugh, every mocking word pierced his heart like a sharp stone. He quickly scrambled to gather his trinkets from the ground, but their cruel words echoed in his mind, making it difficult to focus. His hands trembled, not from the fall, but from the deep hurt of being ridiculed by people who had once been his friends. Finally, he managed to collect his belongings and continued on to the market, but the day was already ruined. The laughter and mocking words stayed with him, clouding his thoughts and weighing heavily on his heart. Though he set up his stall, he could barely speak to the customers. That night, as he returned home, Kia's heart was filled with shame and frustration. He was beginning to wonder if his fate would ever change. Kia's struggles only worsened with time. He found it harder and harder to make enough money from selling his trinkets, and often the small earnings weren't enough to buy food. As a result, he was forced to borrow money from others in the village just to survive. One day, Kia borrowed money from a man named Toro. Toro was known for his wealth and his impatience. He valued his money above all else and despised waiting when someone owed him. Kia promised to repay Toro within a few days, but when the time came, Kia still didn't have enough money. Early one morning, as Kia was setting up his market stall, Toro stormed toward him, his voice booming with anger. "Kia, where is my money? Pay me now," he demanded, causing heads to turn in the market. Kia, knowing he couldn't repay him, pleaded for more time. "Please, give me a little more time. I'll pay you soon," Kia begged. But Toro's patience had run out. Furious, he slapped Kia across the face, the sound echoing through the market square. Kia's cheeks stung with pain, and tears welled in his eyes, but the worst pain came from the humiliation of being struck in front of the entire village. Some kind-hearted traders, feeling pity for Kia, gathered small sums of money and helped him repay Toro. Though grateful, Kia couldn't shake the deep shame that clung to him. That night, as he lay in his small hut, he felt defeated and hopeless, more so than ever before. Desperation pushed Kia to do something he had never imagined. He decided to visit his childhood friend, Jeto. Jeto, now a wealthy and respected man, had left behind his poor roots long ago. His large house and fine clothes were the envy of the village. Kia hoped that Jeto would be willing to help him escape the poverty that had trapped him for so long. Kia made his way to Jeto's grand house with a mix of hope and anxiety. When he arrived, he knocked on the door, feeling his heart race with nervousness. Jeto opened the door, and his eyes immediately swept over Kia's ragged appearance, his old, torn clothes and worn-out sandals. The look on Jeto's face was one of disgust, not welcome. "I don't want your poverty to rub off on me," Jeto sneered, not even bothering to invite Kia inside. Kia swallowed his pride, his heart heavy with shame, but he told Jeto why he had come. "I want to be like you, Jeto. I'm tired of being poor. Please, help me." Jeto paused for a moment before he replied. "If you truly want to escape poverty, I can help you. But know this, once you start down this path, there's no turning back. And no one must ever know where your wealth comes from." His words sent a shiver down Kia's spine, but desperation clouded his judgment. Kia agreed. Jeto handed Kia a small sum of money and promised that it was only the beginning. Kia thanked him, though the unease in his heart remained. What had he gotten himself into? Kia used the money Jeto gave him to buy food and goods for himself and his mother. For the first time in a long while, they ate a hearty meal, and Kia felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, things were finally turning around for him. However, the warning Jeto had given him echoed in his mind: once you start, there's no turning back. A few days later, Kia returned to Jeto's house to learn what he had to do next. Jeto took Kia to meet a powerful priest known for his mysterious rituals. The priest, a man with piercing eyes and a cold demeanor, looked Kia up and down, as though peering into his soul. "If you wish to be truly wealthy, you must be willing to make a great sacrifice," the priest said. "Bring me the heart of someone who shares your blood." Kia's heart pounded with fear. The only family he had was his mother. The thought of harming her filled him with dread, but the priest's voice was firm. "You have 3 days." The weight of the priest's words pressed down on Kia as he left the shrine. For 3 days, he wrestled with the impossible choice. Could he betray the one person who had always loved him, just for wealth? Yet the fear of madness or death gnawed at him, making it impossible to think clearly. As the deadline loomed, Kia grew more withdrawn. His mother, sensing that something was deeply troubling him, tried to comfort him. "My son, you seem troubled. What is it that weighs on your heart?" she asked gently. But Kia couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. He forced a smile and lied, "It's nothing, Mama. I'm just tired." Inside, however, his heart was in turmoil. The thought of hurting his mother filled him with anguish, but the fear of what would happen if he didn't bring the priest what he demanded was overwhelming. For 2 days, Kia wandered the village in a fog of confusion and fear. His appetite vanished, and sleep eluded him. Every time he looked at his mother, his heart ached. But on the 3rd day, as the sun began to rise, he knew he was running out of time. The night was still and dark as Kia stood outside his mother's room, a machete trembling in his hands. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. He felt sick with guilt and fear, but the priest's warning echoed in his ears. If he didn't do this, he would die, or worse, lose his mind. With tears streaming down his face, Kia raised the machete and did the unthinkable. In the silence of the night, he took his mother's life, the one person who had loved him unconditionally. Kia, now numb from the horror of what he had done, placed his mother's heart in a calabash and rushed to the priest's shrine. His clothes were stained with her blood, and his hands were trembling with both fear and regret. As he neared the shrine, his thoughts raced. He hoped that once the ritual was completed, everything would somehow be worth it. The wealth, the success, the respect he had longed for, it had to come now, after such a terrible sacrifice. But when Kia arrived at the shrine, a shocking sight awaited him. The priest, the one who had promised him unimaginable wealth in exchange for his mother's heart, lay on the ground motionless. His eyes were closed, and his chest no longer rose with breath. The priest was dead. Kia's heart dropped. He stood frozen, the calabash in his trembling hands, unsure of what to do. He had committed the unthinkable act for the promise of riches, and now the only person who could fulfill that promise was gone. All of his hopes, all of his dreams of a better life, crumbled in that instant. Kia collapsed to his knees in front of the shrine, tears streaming down his face. He wailed in agony, realizing the full weight of what he had done. He had killed his own mother, the person who had cared for him through every hardship, for nothing. His body shook with grief as he clutched the bloodied calabash, his heart filled with sorrow deeper than anything he had ever known. His cries echoed in the early morning air, reaching the nearby villagers. Curious and concerned, they hurried toward the shrine, and when they arrived, they were greeted by a horrifying sight. Kia sat on the ground, drenched in blood, weeping uncontrollably. The villagers, shocked by the scene, whispered among themselves, wondering what terrible event had occurred. When they peered into the calabash and saw the heart inside, their whispers turned to gasps of horror. The villagers were horrified by what they had discovered. News of Kia's terrible act spread quickly throughout the village, and by mid-morning, the entire community knew that he had killed his own mother. Outraged and sickened, they gathered at the shrine, demanding justice. Some even called for Kia's death, unable to comprehend how anyone could commit such an atrocity. The elders of the village were summoned to the shrine, for they were the wisest and most respected members of the community. It was their duty to decide the punishment for grave offenses. When Kia was brought before them, his head hung low in shame. His clothes were still stained with his mother's blood, and his eyes, once filled with hope, were now empty and hollow. The eldest of the council, a man known for his deep wisdom, spoke first. "Kia," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "is it true that you have killed your own mother?" Kia, barely able to speak, nodded. His voice was little more than a whisper as he confessed. "Yes, it is true," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. He explained how, driven by desperation and guided by greed, he had sought out the priest in hopes of becoming rich. He recounted how the priest had promised him wealth in exchange for the heart of a family member, and how, in his fear of death and madness, he had chosen to kill his mother. The villagers listened in stunned silence, their anger growing with every word. When Kia finished his confession, the elders turned to one another, their faces grave. Never before had the village seen such a crime, and the people's thirst for justice was strong. Many demanded that Kia be executed for his crime, but the eldest elder raised his hand to silence the crowd. "Death," he said solemnly, "would be too easy a punishment for Kia. He has committed an unspeakable crime, but he must live with the weight of his actions. His suffering must not end quickly." The elders deliberated for a long time before reaching their final decision. They agreed that Kia's crime was too severe for him to continue living among the villagers. He could no longer be a part of the community, for the people would never forgive him. However, rather than executing him, the elders chose a different path. They decided to banish Kia to the deepest part of the forest, where he would live in solitude, far from the village and the people who now despised him. Kia, too broken to resist, accepted his fate. The elders commanded that he be escorted to the edge of the village, where the forest began. The villagers watched in silence as Kia was led away. Many of them still whispered in disbelief, unable to comprehend how greed could lead someone to such darkness. Some were still angry, while others felt a strange sense of pity for the man who had lost everything. At the edge of the forest, Kia paused for a moment and looked back at the village, knowing he would never return. His heart was heavy with guilt, and he could barely muster the strength to take another step. The villagers who had gathered watched as he disappeared into the thick trees, his figure swallowed by the shadows of the forest. As Kia ventured deeper into the wilderness, the loneliness and regret weighed down on him like a heavy stone. He was haunted by the memory of his mother's love, and the terrible act he had committed to chase after wealth. The deeper he walked, the more he realized that no amount of gold could ever fill the emptiness inside him. From that day on, Kia lived in the forest, alone and forgotten. His only companions were the whispers of the trees and the howls of distant animals. He had traded his humanity for a promise of wealth, but in the end, he had lost everything that truly mattered. Back in the village, life slowly returned to normal after Kia's banishment, though the memory of his crime lingered in the minds of the people. The villagers came together to honor Kia's mother, burying her with great respect. They mourned her loss deeply, for she had been a kind woman, loved by many. Her grave became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked greed and the devastating consequences it could have. The elders, in response to the tragedy, passed a new law. No one would be allowed to seek wealth through dark and mysterious means, and anyone who wished to consult a spiritual leader or priest would first have to gain the approval of the king. The village shrine, once a place where people sought power and wealth, was closed off, and the people vowed never to let such a tragedy happen again. The story of Kia and his mother became a powerful lesson for future generations.